ladies and gentlemen. I'm quite stunned that the room is filled. Thank you for attending my session. My name is Miriam Wiesner. I'm a PFE, Premier Field Engineer for Secure Infrastructure at Microsoft in Germany. And, well, if you attended the session of David and Julien earlier, honestly, I don't have a cool story for my name, for introducing my surname. So, yeah, let me introduce myself with another story. And yes, I'm actually fighting with a microphone. So, who am I? When I was dating my fiancé, he was from Bonn, that's far away from the town where I'm living, and he visited me on the weekend, and there was this awesome, cool restaurant in the city, and I thought, hey, why don't we go there for this evening? But this restaurant was so cool that it was fully booked, and we had no chance to book a table using the web page of the restaurant. So I investigated the website and I saw, yeah, oh cool. The website, the form is only secured by a JavaScript. So I investigated a bit further and I found out, hey cool, if I alter the date of the date picker, I'm able to submit my form. And yeah, it was only for investigation, of course. So 2 hours later, when the restaurant opened, I got a call. And the lady who worked in this restaurant, she was so nervous, she was so excited, she was, oh my God, I am so sorry. Nobody called you earlier. Of course, we do have a table for you. And so we had the chance to go there this evening, and we had one of the best tables in the restaurant. And yes, maybe that's one of the reasons why my fiancé stayed with me and asked me, because he really likes eating. Today, I'm not doing any red team stuff. Today, we will talk about blue team stuff, securing your infrastructure with JEA, with just enough administration. Well, a bit of the agenda. Still fighting with a microphone. The typical attack timeline. When an attacker investigates your environment, he has all the time he wants to. So maybe he does this in an afternoon, the investigation, but also maybe he has several months or years for preparing the attack. When he launches the attack, most of the time it is finished by 24 to 48 hours. So after this time, the attacker has full control of your environment. And yes, by this time, it is not your environment anymore. Unfortunately, in most of the organizations, this happens. It takes more than 200 days until the organizations recognizes that there is an attacker in the environment. And to be honest, there are even more companies who don't even know it. So earlier, and yes, I do security assessments for Active Directory security and Windows Server security. And to be honest, yeah, there are still customers saying, we do have a firewall, yeah, a hardware firewall, we have a pretty good one, and we also have a pretty good one antivirus software. We are safe, we are secure, we don't have anything to worry. Well, 10 years earlier, maybe this was a thing. Not anymore. Because, yeah, all those firewalls are pretty good. All those antivirus software not having patterns anymore, but having also intelligence behind, yeah, they are also quite good. But yeah, it's too hard for the attacker. So what does an attacker do? He aims for the weakest spot. And yeah, we heard it, social engineering still works. The weakest spot, this is the human. So the attacker prepares his attack and sends a phishing mail, for example, to his victim, or does a waterhole attack and lures the victim to his prepared website. And yeah, a small mistake could expose the whole environment. So when the victim opens the prepared website, the computer gets infected, the attacker is able to harvest credentials, and yes, he harvests and he uses them for lateral movement and harvests even more credentials, and does this until he has full control of the environment. And yeah, what he can do, he can disrupt the business operation, also known as ransomware. Yeah, he could do that, but they wouldn't know it very quick because nothing works anymore. But the attacker could also implement his own code into the environment and gather data and could steal data and also modify data. For example, if you're having a database with important, let's say, people who are donating their organs, and if the attacker manipulates this database, he is able to insert even more people there, or inserts other people who are getting those organs. Who of you has heard of the tiering model we use at Microsoft? So, yeah, many hands. I will explain it for the other people who have not heard about it. So, we at Microsoft, we recommend structuring your environment using this tier model. Tier 0 consists of servers who are able to control your whole environment. So if those servers are lost, your whole environment is, for example, domain controllers, your PKI, and also systems on which domain controllers and other tier 1 devices rely on, for example, WSUS or SCCM. And yeah, some customers, when I explain the tiering model to them, I ask, oh yeah, what are your most important assets in your environment? What are the assets that attackers could use to harm, to do the most harm? And they are saying, oh yeah, we do have an important HR database. This is our most important asset. And then I ask, if an attacker compromises your HR database, is he able to compromise your whole environment? And they say, no, but those information, those are really, really important. And I say, you see, Those informations are really, really important for you, but an attacker could not use those information, or yeah, he could use, but he cannot use it to gain control immediately. So those assets are in tier 1, and also all your other tier 1 servers. So tier 1 consists of servers. And in tier 2, there's every other device like workstations, laptops, handheld devices, printers, and so on. And so, in the best case, those tiers are separated so that an attacker cannot move from tier to tier. But if it's not, it works like this. The attacker exploits the first workstation, gets credentials, moves on, lateral movement, to the next workstation, gets the next credentials, and he does this until he gets an important identity. For example, domain administrator. And when he has the domain administrator, he can do the leapfrog, he can jump to tier 0, and yeah, whole environment is his. And actually, yes, I said, in the best case, you separate your tiers, you separate your devices, your assets. So this scenario is not possible. But when I am at the customer and when I assess the environment, actually, the reality is not that they really have implemented a great tiering model. The reality is like this. So the whole environment could be exposed really, really quick if an attacker gathers the right identities. There are several mitigations. For example, not using the password everywhere, and also using credential hygiene, so do not log on to lower trust devices and let your credentials lay around. But there's also another great method which helps you, and it is called just enough administration. And this is what I'm talking about today. So, who has heard about just enough administration yet? Whoa. And who actually uses just enough administration? Only very, very few hands. Just enough administration is a PowerShell feature. Maybe you have heard of at the PowerShell conference. It is declared as a security feature. You can use it as a security feature, but it does not take you away every of your tasks. What I personally think is great about JEA. When you use JEA to connect to other machines, you don't use your own account. So for example, if you use your account to connect to a lower trust machine, your credentials are not exposed on the lower trust machine. And on top of that, you can restrict the tasks of your administrators. So what are the use cases for JEA? Well, there are several use cases. There are also some sessions from Raimund and Jan-Hendrik Peters. I don't know if they are here. Are they here? Raimund, say hi. There are also some other use cases, so I totally recommend the session, Hands-on JEA. And great, calendar loves me. Oh yeah, GDPR is great. But I'm not an expert on GDPR, so I cannot talk about it. One of the use cases is if you want to outsource high privilege tasks. For example, you do have a junior administrator who helps you with the administration. You don't want the junior administrator to have full rights on your environment. You just want to give him a few until he learns and gets better. There are also some other methods, for example, server operators or supporters. Yes, I also know customers who are having server operators maintaining the Active Directory servers and domain administrators who are maintaining the Active Directory. Actually, if they don't use JEA or are not restricted in another way, if the account of such a supporter or server operator is getting phished, the attacker has so much possibilities, so much accounts to use. So if the server operator is restricted to only use several commands, there is less risk. I'm saying less risk because there is always a risk. But yeah, that's software. Service accounts. When I'm performing assessments, I find a lot of service accounts who are having very, very, very much rights. The worst case was I did an assessment and I looked, hey, which accounts are in the enterprise administrators? And I found 26 service accounts. And the customer said, oh yeah, my software requires that this service account is enterprise administrator. This software requires that this account is enterprise operator. And yeah, this account should be domain administrator, but yeah, we put him into the enterprise admins because everybody else is also in there. Don't do this. Client help desk. When a client is compromised and the attacker has no chance to gather credentials for lateral movement because there are maybe restrictions implemented, the attacker wants to get more useful credentials. So what does he do? He crashes some services, because when he crashes some services, a support guy will show up very quick to help the user. And when the support guy logs on to this PC, the attacker could harvest his credentials to use it on other PCs. So if the client help desk now uses JEA, he has only some restricted operations he can perform on the client, and the best thing about he does not leave his credentials on the client, because in the background, in the best case, a virtual account is created, a local virtual account, or a group managed service account. Yeah, having a group managed service account leaves a bigger window, but the attacker has to react immediately, because after a few hours, the password is changed. Having multi-tenants to administer is also an option, because you don't want, if you are the master administrator administering multi-tenants, you don't want your passwords or your credentials spraying around in every tenant environment. So yeah, also a good idea. Auditing. When you're auditing your systems, most of the time you really need high credentials because you want to audit your Active Directory, for example. And you don't want to give your service account for auditing or your auditor full access. So also a great option for using JEA. And as I said before, with the client help desk, in every case, when administering lower trust systems, awesome opportunity because you don't leave your credentials behind. If you remember our tiering model, and if you remember when the customer said, yeah, our HR database is the most important asset we have. And I say, yeah, it's tier 1. Then you have only the tier 1 restriction. But if you want to restrict in tier without creating more tiers, JEA is also a great opportunity to restrict your administrators and to don't leave your credentials behind. And of course, yeah, there are many, many more use cases. You only have to think about it. So, how does JEA work? You do have a client where a non-administrative user works on, and beware the fact that this client is a non-administrative user does not mean that you can that you lay your client open, that this is also a client where he works and where he opens all the phishing mails. No, this is not a good idea. You also have to restrict that client, because if the user on the client is doing sensitive operations, and also if he is restricted, you don't want that his account is compromised because he has more rights than a standard user. So if this client, if the user on the client connects via PS remoting, he connects using his identity, and there is already a configuration running in the background who restricts the user who put in his role to say, okay, this user has only the right, for example, to perform a get AD user. And then the virtual account or the group managed service account, which is used, connects to the server. So the credentials of the user never enter the remote system. Of course, it's PS remoting, so it's not RDP. And if you don't restrict RDP, you have just configured your flaw in your environment. So yeah, the user should not be able to use any other connecting methods. So maybe some of you have seen this picture before. Where is JEA? Where does JEA come into play? So when entering a PS session, there's no JEA at all. It's just a PS session. Same thing in green with a session option. No JEA at all. You're just configuring some options into your session. Next step, yeah, you are able to restrict who is able to connect. That's with the configuration, but there's still no JEA. And then with WMF 5.0, JEA comes into play when you configure the role definition and the user connects. So I've prepared a little demo. For this demo, JEA is already installed. For this demo, we need the Active Directory module. Oh, sorry. Sorry, never zoomed before. So, above the time? Oh, yes, of course. No, I thought the internals. Sorry. Is it better now? A bit more? Okay, so I just imported those modules, and I just prepared some skeleton file creation. So you already heard that JEA consists of two files. There is, on the one hand, the PS role capability file and the PS session configuration file. I just executed those two commands. I created an empty skeleton config for the role capability, and I opened it in PowerShell ISE. So the role capability file describes the command each role is able to execute, while the session configuration file configures the roles, configures who can do what, who is in which role. So I just generated an empty skeleton role capability file and also a PS session configuration file. So there's nothing configured yet, but there is a variety of commands and configuration you can configure. You can configure which CMD-LEDs are visible, which are shown to the user who connects, which functions, and also which modules to import. For example, my Active Directory module I will use later. In the session configuration file, there are all the configuration definitions for the session. For example, I mentioned earlier that there is a virtual account used, a local virtual account used in the background. Yes, you can use a group managed service account, or you can use a virtual local account. And please do not think that this is the local system account, or do not use the local system account, and also do not use the network account, because, yeah, you might just configure your Nextfloor in your environment. I just recently had an email where a customer just wanted to configure the local system account, and yeah, I say, no, don't do that. So, yes, use the local virtual account or a group managed service account. But let's do this with some parameters to show you how it works. I just removed my test files, and I created a configuration script to show you how it works. So just first some variables, so we don't have to type anything in again and again, and we create the paths if they are not created yet. So I'm creating a module which you can reuse later. And I'm adding the visible CMD LEDs, restart service, and get AD user. And I'm also configuring the author and what the file is named and where it is located. And it's opened, and you see it's populated. Not everything, but the configurations I made. In the next step, I'm creating a session configuration. You see, I'm running it as virtual account, and my role definitions, I created an operator earlier. So I'm restricting my operator to the operator role capability. And yes, I also have an operator account in my Active Directory here. Oh, I forgot to change the administrator to Miriam, but I think it doesn't care right now. I don't care right now. So you see, everything I configured earlier as parameter, it was inserted. And now this is where the magic starts. You can either register your configuration manually, what I'm doing now, or you can also register your configuration via DSC, which is a better option when you have to configure several servers in your environment. So I'm just displaying the session configuration, and you see the operator session was created, and only my operator account has the permission here. Very secure password, by the way. I recommend you using a more complex and longer password. And my PS session was created. I opened a session to my local host. You can open a local host session, but you also can create a remote session with using JEA. While using get command, you see, yeah, there are some default commands which JEA just configures for you. And you see, there is the get AD user and the restart service I configured earlier. So just let's try, and it works. As we configured the AD user earlier. And if I enter another command, like get AD computer, you see that it doesn't work because I did not allow the user to run it. We are allowed to restart the service, DNS cache. We are not allowed to restart the DHCP without the force. But as we did not configure any restrictions for the parameter, it also works with the force. And of course, start service, as we did not configure it, doesn't work. So planning for the deployment. Yes, what we need. We need PowerShell remoting, as it is based on it, and we need PowerShell at least 5.0 and WMF 5.0. And Actually, where is JEA, or what service do you need? As PowerShell 5.0 and WMF 5.0 were installed on Windows Server 2016 TP by default. You can use it there. On older versions like 2012 or 2008 R2, SP1 only with WMF 5.0. And having PowerShell 6 core, by now you can use it everywhere, even on a Linux system. And yeah, this is just a photograph from this morning. Jeffrey Snover just mentioned, yes, JEA core is also a feature which is implemented in Azure Stack to secure the design, not to secure the design, to secure Azure Stack and to implement some securing options. So I had to insert it just quickly. How to deploy JEA? Well, actually, the first step is very annoying. You have to audit who is using what. You have to identify the users and groups. You have to identify the commands, who uses what. And the users have to move to PowerShell. You can start transcript to audit the commands the users are using, but you also have to evaluate. In the next step, you restrict your CMDlets to those your users are using, and you create your custom functions, and you restrict your users and deploy your first JEA configuration. Of course, there are options to check the syntax before you are deploying it, but yeah, you also should test it before you deploy it via DSC on your local system to see if everything works. And then, as a next step, test for your users, test if everybody is able to do what they need to do, and correct. So when you correct, you're going back to step 1 and just identify again which commands you missed or which commands are too much. Of course, risks and misconfiguration. JEA is also a software component, and there is a bunch of flaws you can implement yourself. For example, by giving your user the possibility to bypass JEA. For example, giving the user the possibility to add a local member or an AD group member and allowing the user to enter his user account into the enterprise admins. Cool stuff. Also, net share, for example. Yes, net share is not evil. So why don't we give the net command to the administrators to my restricted users? Right. Net user. You can create user accounts with net. So if you are using those commands restricted, make it strict as possible, and don't allow your users to extend their rights. Another great option to insert flaws into your configuration is by giving them the possibility to run arbitrary code or their own malware scripts. For example, I tried start process earlier. It did not work because I only configured restart no, I did not do it earlier. I did a restart service, but the start service did not work, but new service would be a similar operation. So if you're giving your users the option to start a process or a script or to invoke commands or code, that's not a good option. There's also the option to configure wildcards, and yeah, it's also not that good because you can do everything after the configured get, for example, and if there is a get, you can get everything you want to. There was also a tool called JEA helper tool, and yeah, it's not that good to use the JEA helper tool because the JEA helper tool, yes, it is an automated tool to create some basic configurations, but actually they are not really secure. Don't use the JEA helper tool, or if you use it, just use it as a first draft and then restrict your configuration by yourself. And actually, there are also some configuration, there are some files published on GitHub, for example, for the IIS server role. And yes, just look over them. Don't take them as granted that they are secure. You have to validate them. Don't use them if you haven't controlled. You have role capability files. And what if an attacker gets access to those role capability files? Yes, he's able to inject code and to alter those roles you created earlier. So use signing to protect your role capability files, and also if you audit who does what from your users, secure your transcript files. And there is also an awesome post, PowerShell loves the blue team, on the PowerShell blog. I think Lee Holmes also was a creator of the post. Have a look at this. It's a really, really nice blog article about how you can use PowerShell to secure your infrastructure. And last but not least, I cannot mention it often enough. If you do not take the admin rights away from your users, JEA doesn't do anything, because if I'm able to RDP to a server, JEA does not restrict me. And yeah, most common concerns about JEA. I'm very excited about JEA because I think it's a cool option framework. So when I talk to customers and I present JEA and I say, oh yeah, JEA is so awesome, it helps you securing your identities. Then they ask, yeah, but how do we implement? And I say, okay, yeah, you have to audit, and then you have to create your role capability files, and you have to define your roles. And they say, oh, it's difficult to implement. No, I don't want to do that. Yes, it is, but we are working on it. In my spare time, I'm working on a project with some other great colleagues at Microsoft. We just want to ease the use of JEA. And also, feel free, if you created your own role templates, feel free to submit them on GitHub. And the other question, is there a GUI? what are my non-PowerShell skilled administrators are doing. I want to have a GUI. And actually, in the past, most of the time I said, no, there isn't a GUI yet. I'm sorry. But maybe you just follow the news. Windows Admin Center was released, I think it was 13th April. And yes, Windows Admin Center is a GUI who relies on PowerShell remoting. And there is a very basic JEA implementation behind yet, but I hope they will extend it. At the moment, there are 3 roles. I think it's hypervisor administrators, an auditor, and an administrator. But I'm very positive that they will extend it. And yes, finally, there will be a GUI. Woo! Yes. Yes, totally. Yes, for the recording, yeah, they really like it because most of the users want to use GUIs, and we are all happy about Windows Admin Center. Great job, guys. And yes, only using JEA is not the only solution. There are many more things you should do. For example, don't use the same password on your clients, don't use the same password also on your servers, bad option. And separate your admin user from your user account, and also use privileged access workstations.
Yeah, that costs money. So
yes, but there are also options to virtualize it. So yes, but the resources to doing so also cost money. Privileged access workstations, just for those who don't know them yet, are physically separated machines where your administrator work on, who are not having internet access, and where your administrators are not able to receive emails. So the risk of getting infected is way less. First step, of course, for your domain administrators. Next step, and this is the point where all my customers saying, oh my God, what are you recommending? Is, yeah, also use privileged access workstations for Tier 1 and Tier 2. And there's also a good option to use just-in-time administration, so just to restrict the time frame in which an attacker could use the credentials he maybe gathered, and use multi-factor for evaluation. Also, in most of the environments, they are just building it. But in most of the environments, there is no attack detection yet. So how do they find an attacker if they don't look for? And of course, hardening your domain and your disease is also a good option. And this is by, also, for example, removing old authentication protocols like LAN Manager, NTLM version 1, securing your communication, and so on. And also, don't use SMB1. It's evil. Modernizing roles is quite a hard task, therefore it's a long-term task. Use smart card or passport authentication, or actually there is also a new option by using Windows Hello for Business. Certificate authentication, that's the magic behind. And yeah, with Windows Server 2016, there is an option that your certificates can enroll themselves and can re-roll their passwords by themselves. An own admin forest for Active Directory administration is also an awesome thing to have, but also a very expensive thing, and there's also a lot of work to realize it. Code integrity, so nobody is allowed to tamper with your configuration. And of course, shielded VMs. And since shielded VMs is only a Hyper-V feature, if you're not using Hyper-V, okay, then at least use an encrypted virtual machine if you're running virtual DCs. This and many other descriptions you're finding on AKAMS/privsec, if you just want to have a look at it again. And as a summary, yes, JEA is great, and it helps you, but don't use it as your only security barrier, because when everything else is shitty, even JEA cannot help you. Just as I said before, also secure your non-admin accounts who are having JEA delegated rights, who are having more rights than a standard user. Check very, very, very careful if your configuration allows someone to extend the rights. And yes, also have pen tests in your environment. Secure all your important files, for example, your config files, your scripts, and also your transcripts, so that nobody is able to tamper them. And yes, most important, if they are having other options than JEA, they will use it. So take away other possibilities to connect.